Cool, we're live. Yay!
Yay!
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
Yeah, nice to
How
be
are you
here.
both?
Oh, doing very well.
Yes, very well. This weekend, these last couple weeks have been just absolutely nuts with this project. But we have all of the files in. Everything is almost done, and it's like, oh my god, we can breathe at least for like a couple days.
Yeah, we had a
Nice.
listening party on Friday, and it was wonderful.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. I'm very happy to have you both here. So thanks so much for the time. Yeah, I think I would start right off with talking about what is programmable music, and who better to explain it than you both.
Awesome. I'm happy. I'm happy to sort of go through it. So, I think in order to explain async music, it's really important to also mention what async art does. So, like async art on a high level is the ability to be able to create dynamic art. So essentially, like art that changes over time, right? Um, and that can be done in two primary ways. And the question that always comes up that I just also want to answer is like people ask like, well, do you need any sort of like coding knowledge or anything like that? And the answer is no. Like we have templates and we have all sorts of different items and tools for artists to be able to come in and just upload their artworks and then instantly get mint their stuff. So there are two ways to create dynamic artwork or art that changes over time. One is through autonomy, which is like through time, geographic location, statistical data, stuff like that. And then the other way is through partial ownership and fractionalization. And so async music kind of really plays into that, and I'll explain that in a second. But like, what do I mean by fractionalization? I mean like artists can isolate certain parts of artwork, whether that's music or art, visual art, and they're able to essentially like sell those parts, and then have the owners customize them. So, an artist, if we're talking about the Mona Lisa, and the artist wants to isolate, fractionalize Mona Lisa's eyes, then the artist can set, Mona Lisa's eyes to be red, green, blue, yellow, and then the owner of Mona Lisa's eyes can then set it to the options that the artist has created. So essentially it's like a menu option of different ways that you can customize the art and make it, and as a whole, it makes the art a lot more democratic as a result. And so going into async music, let's talk about this really quickly. There's like a master track, which is like the overall artwork that you see, the overall music that you see, or that you hear rather. And then there's also stems, and those stems are parts of the music. They're layers essentially. And those stems are comprised of different parts, like different instruments in the instrumentation in the music. So for example, like if you have a song with voice, piano, guitar, percussion, those are all like those four parts are all different. And as a result, like with async music, you can now customize different versions of that song. So like, for example, like maybe you take the percussion stem, and within the stem, you have multiple options. Maybe the percussion plays different rhythms. Maybe the guitar within the stem, there are different variants where you can play different harmonies and different melodies and different stuff like that. With voice, maybe you sing different lyrics. And so as a result, what you get is this like largely democratic process where the people who own the STEM NFTs actually get to control the overall listening experience for everybody else. And this is not a new concept. Like we have heard this many times, and especially in classical music. Glenn Gould, I wrote a post about this on my Twitter a couple of days ago. Like Glenn Gould in 1969, predicted that music would be much more democratic, that we would be giving people kits, and people would assemble their favorite music combination through those kits, and async music for the first time is able to do that. And so one other thing to mention here is that like with async music, with these stems, you can change the audio, but the audio layers are actually, the audio stems and variants are actually tied to a visual aspect, and we'll get into an example, like we'll get into examples with that, with Betty's notebook in specific. And so as a result, when you buy this artwork, when you buy a stem with async music, you also get the image that's associated with that stem in particular, and that image changes based on the variant. And so that's like a very, very clear representation of how it works. But here is some other stuff. So as you can see here, like this is the basic image of our cover art, which we'll go into in a minute. On the bottom left-hand corner, you'll be able to see, sort of the current mix of items, and a QR code that takes you to a web player where you'll be able to hear the song in its entirety. But these represent which stems and which variants are currently being played within each stem. And so that'll be immediately apparent on the bottom left, as well as the ever-changing visual artwork on the async music platform. So that's a basic overview. I think rather than like explaining it any further, I think it's, unless Brian, you have anything that you want to add on to this, I think it's best to, like that we elaborate it by allowing audiences to experience the project itself.
Yeah, no, I think you explained it very well. I kind of talk about it as like a collaborative remix that different people can create music together independently, which is something very exciting.
Absolutely. It definitely is a remix. However, we do get this question all the time, of what does it mean to remix? Like, can I actually take the stem and then do whatever I want with it? The answer is no. Like, you can remix it within the parameters of what the composer or the musician has put in. You can't actually add your own, vision or anything onto it, at least yet. So, but yeah, so that's basically the premise.
And so I'm seeing here like the maximum kind of like stems and variants are up to 9. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you can have okay. So the collector, let's say, or the collector can have like up to 9 different stems and variants that he can apply onto the kind of master track.
That's exactly correct. Yes, that's exactly correct.
Nice.
And if people want to read more about this, if they go to edition.async.art, there's a whole blog post dedicated to what async music does and the capabilities and all that stuff, where they can read a little bit more. Lisa, one of the co-founders, actually wrote a really comprehensive article about how it all works, technically speaking.
Amazing. I might link it below after we finish up so that everybody
Awesome.
can read it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think let's dig into this collaboration. Like, first of all, how did it come about? Like, how did you kind of unite?
Brian, you want to take this one, or should I?
Well, yeah, I mean, this piece started much more, much earlier than my participation in it. Sam and Nicholas and the choir, they created this beautiful piece of music, and then, Sam approached me about what I thought about the music, and I found it to be inspiring and haunting and relatable in a lot of different ways because, there's a lot of aspects of connecting and reaching out and hoping people hear you. And, it kind of hit me on an emotional level. And so I kind of absorbed it, and I kind of took all the information between, the notebook that Betty wrote down what she heard in the story. And, maybe we should talk more about the initial story to this. Maybe Sam can probably explain that better, but then, so that's kind of when I came in, was how to form a visual that's programmable around this performance. Sam, do you want to talk more about the backstory about the music?
Yeah. So as you can see, just to give you context of how many players we have going on with this project, there's a lot. And actually, this project has really been in production for like 3 years now. We originally, I'm the artistic director of this professional ensemble called Verdigris Ensemble. I started it in 2017, and the whole point of Verdigris Ensemble is to be able to reach a wider spread of audiences through creative concert programming, unconventional use of space, and collaboration. So all of our projects that we do are really based on interesting pieces that get people excited about the project material. So this scene is from a production that we did called Dust Bowl. Dust Bowl was based on the American events of what happened in the 20s, of like dust storms and all sorts of crazy like environmental disasters that happened in the panhandle of Texas and in Oklahoma. And we compiled a bunch of interviews that were local to Texas and Dallas, of people that survived it, or ancestors, letters and newspaper articles, and then we set it to music and then presented it. And actually, like, if you notice on the floor, there's like 1,700 pounds of sand that we had, to signify like the disaster and walking on sand, all this different stuff. And so like the whole process, the whole project of Betty's Notebook started right after our first year. I needed to find something really interesting to do with the ensemble, something that was going to really push boundaries. And what that ended up being was, I contacted this composer named Nicholas Reeves, who I knew from a friend. So he was a friend of a friend, and I had heard about this really weird document. In fact, I think I stumbled on it on Reddit. If that like totally makes any sense. I stumbled on it on Reddit, and then I contacted this guy, and I was like, I found this like crazy like notebook that's supposedly like Amelia Earhart's last final distress calls. Nobody knows whether it's actually true. Would you be interested in setting it to music? And he was like, oh my God, like I absolutely would love to set it to music. This would be amazing. And so like within a year, from 2018 to 2019, it was actually less than a year. It was like spring 2018, and then February 2019 we premiered it. He like literally worked day and night on a product. Gave us Betty's Notebook, and it's this 20-minute piece that is really, really, really intense, and really like nothing I've ever heard or worked on or seen before. Also, it is innumerably difficult to sing, and really, really difficult to put together. But once you've put it together, and once you start hearing all the pieces, they begin to really make sense, and it really brings the piece alive. And so we premiered it in 2018, and then Async was already talking about this adding a programmable music function, et cetera, and because of coronavirus, like all of our main stage seasons were like basically, or performances were basically canceled. So we had to find a way to still exist somehow, and to continue producing something musical, without just being silent for the entire year. And so we were thinking like, what do we need to record? Is there something that we can record? Is there something that we can do? And what ended up happening was like Async Music, basically like the team approached me and were like, would you like to work on this project? And I was like, absolutely, this fits exactly. I was already thinking about recording something. And from then on, it made the most sense to do Betty's Notebook. And here we are today. So basically, like, I'll go into the details of how it works and what the details are, but suffice it to say, because the work is, it's like this, it's like an, I don't know how better to describe it other than it's like an onion. Like there's so many different layers, and even I, who spent over like 200 hours mixing, listening, producing, conducting, listening, like I'm still learning things about the piece that I didn't notice before. So it's a very dense thing, but it's like one of those things that as you hear and you revisit over and over again, it makes a lot more sense, and it becomes like a lot more understandable, and you understand the genius of the piece. And in order to like get people sort of in the door, when we were sort of thinking about the visual aspect of the piece, I really wanted to find an artist that was going to showcase what the piece was in a very attainable and inviting way. And so I started researching like a bunch of different artists that did crypto art and NFTs, and Bryan stuck out to me instantly because his style is very approachable, but it's not like, it doesn't sacrifice its quality, and also like it's very good at conveying certain like emotions, certain like themes and items, and it also like it's still like super true to Bryan. And so like from my perspective, Bryan was the perfect fit for this project because like it's this like really it's like this amazingly dense piece that has so much inside of it. But in order to like really begin to dig in, like we need something that's going to be really approachable and also like build a bridge from people who have never heard of like choral music or anything like that to come in and experience it for the first time. And I'm so glad that we worked with Bryan, not only because he's like an amazing artist, but he's also like a really amazing person. From the very beginning of this process, I said, Bryan, this is going to be a learning process for all of us. We're making history here. Like no one's ever done this before. And so we're just going to have to work together through it. And Bryan has been such a great sport about like, all of the things that the challenges that we've come across and the things that we've done. And it's just been like an absolute like amazing experience to work with him. So that's how we landed on Bryan.
Yeah. I mean, that you summed up all of it very well. And thank you for all the compliments. Sam's also wonderful to work with. And so is the whole team of choirs and composers. It's, everyone's putting their all into this. And so, when all of that information kind of came to me, I started thinking about different aspects, the storytelling aspects. This is Betty telling Amelia's story, and then the choir telling Betty's story, and then this piece telling all these stories together. And so you see this kind of traveling word of mouth. And a lot of people didn't believe Betty, but her story still traveled. And so that aspect of like calling out and not knowing if anybody's listening, you hear that both in Amelia's perspective and Betty's perspective. And then our perspective, putting this art out there and hoping people see it and understand it. And so that all kind of came together and I really connected with that. And then like he was saying, I took a lot of inspiration from pop songs about tragedy. Songs like, Last Kiss or something, where it's a song that's incredibly sad and haunting, but it's wrapped in a very pop song that's catchy and you can sing along to. And, I really enjoyed that aspect of kind of, if someone sees it at first glance, they'll think it's kind of a fun, happy piece. But the more you listen to it and really dive in, it's an extremely haunting, tragic, emotional piece. And that was kind of the initial outset, was how do I take all these aspects and wrap it into layers? And so I took aspects from Betty's notebook, which includes both her own diary of what she heard, the transcriptions of what she heard, and also illustrations, which I assume were based on kind of like French fashion posters at the time. And then I kind of wrapped it all within this framing device of being in the radio, so that when someone watches this piece and listens, they're in Betty's body, observing it through this radio frame. And so in that frame, you have variations of her illustrations, you have pieces of her handwriting, you have these colored lines moving with different types of planes that are all based on, Amelia Earhart's plane, but coming out of the woman's mouth, conveying the storytelling aspects. And so I was trying to figure out ways to convey all these deeper ideas in a simplified manner that can be changed and still effectively tell the story. And so that's kind of the genesis of where we're at with this piece.
That's amazing. Like really, really interesting. And obviously, like I'm just thinking, as there's like a bit of a part of it that is like completely generative. Like, you're letting the collector kind of, not only, you're telling a story, but you're also allowing somebody else to kind of retell the story in a way, because they can obviously, piece up different parts of it, different layers. So there's like kind of like even more stories, there's like Betty, Amelia, Sam, you, and, the various collectors. So that's really interesting. And I can imagine it's also challenging to kind of figure out, what should all these layers be, right? Like, how can I best communicate that? Like, how was the process? Like, how did you approach, the actual creation of these layers?
Yeah, I mean, like Sam said, it's been a long process. We're what, like 4 months into it now, and
Yes.
I early on it was like, here's some visuals. What do you think? How can we tie these all together? This could represent this. This can represent that. How do we bring this together? And then once we thought of those layers, it was also, how do these tie into the audio that will be attached to these layers, and how does that make sense, and how does the visuals reflect what the audio is? And so it was a lot of puzzle pieces and trying to make sure everything kind of fits right together. And so just trying to think of different ways. Like if you're looking at the planes, there's a 3D one, there's a 2D one. One has kind of a black and white to signify kind of a more vintage feel, because the audio will be kind of vintage in certain times, with the different radio frames to kind of give different time eras, but still kind of all live within the piece. The tricky part was to give variations, but not necessarily allow the visuals to differentiate enough that if someone's viewing it, they don't understand it. So they all had to kind of be similar enough, but different enough. But so it was a lot of back and forth. And, like Sam said, we've been talking back and forth every week, and more about this for a long time now. And it's been a process, but it's also been, we're learning as we go and kind of reducing it down to the most important basic parts, because it's kind of, it started out very expansive and then we kind of whittled it down.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful for the audience to sort of understand like the storyline, and then we can break it down into the basic layers of what these all represent. So let's go ahead and go back to the very beginning. So as I mentioned before, the basic idea of what Betty's Notebook is this piece is based on the notebook that was written by Betty Clank in 1937 at age 15. Betty Clank thinks that what she heard, or thought that what she heard, was Amelia Earhart's distress signals. We will never know whether the evidence is there's no way to prove whether the evidence is real or not. Or at least nothing, not an easy way to prove it. But there is circumstantial evidence that points to the fact that it is a truthful document, in the sense that, there are things that Betty wrote down in the notebook that people would never have known about Amelia Earhart, and that sort of adds to the mystery of what this piece is. And so the musical adaptation of Betty's Notebook, if I could summarize it in one sentence for audiences, it would be this: we put audiences in front of a shortwave radio, and we have them turn a tuning knob to try and hear Amelia Earhart's voice. But there's all sorts of interference that happens. Radio jazz standards that happen, certain white noise and other small things that happen that obstruct our hearing just a little bit of what Amelia is saying. So in essence, this piece is a simulation of what Betty Clank heard. And we after having the listening party with our choir this past Friday, some people talk about this piece and have mentioned this piece as like almost like listening to a podcast, like a musical podcast, or even like some sort of like musical larger work that has interviews in the middle of it. And so here's how it works on a basic level. It's a 21-minute programmable piece of music that's been split into 5 unique musical pieces, and the piece consists of a master, or the masterpiece, divided and then an additional 4 layers. And each layer contains 3 unique audiovisual states or variants that the owner can toggle between, and those alter the musical texture, the timbre, the narrative for all of the things. And then as layer owners toggle between audio states, that also gets reflected on the masterpiece. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. Thank you, Bryan, for this amazing graphic. I think it's so eye-catching and really, really brings to life this piece a lot. There are 4 major layers to this piece. Layer 1 is the choir. The choir sings what's written in the notebook. Layer 2 is Betty's voice. This is Betty Clank in interviews talking about what she heard on that fateful day. And so Betty's voice and the choir actually they talk between each other a lot. So Betty will say things like, and then I heard the word SOS, and then the choir will sing SOS. Layer 3 is Betty's choir. Now, this is a very interesting layer in the sense that Betty's choir is actually, the composer took Betty's voice, stretched it out, and then isolated certain pitches in her voice and then put it back in. So it's a symbolic reference, like Betty is not just speaking, but she's also singing with the choir. These certain pitches and these certain musical notes that get isolated sound like the gentle whirring of an airplane or a propeller per se. And so those are sort of an interference that comes into play in the piece of music as we go on. And then layer 4 is Betty's radio, which are 5 separate jazz standards that we recorded that intertwine in the middle of these. So like when you're turning the tuning knob, you'll hear some of these jazz standards that start intertwining. And so here's how it works on a musical and an art level, a visual level. So each layer is tethered to a part, which you just saw on the website that I was like scrolling down. So let's talk about the audio, and then we'll sort of talk about how that affects the visual. And Brian, feel free to jump in whenever if you wanna get a little bit more detailed on your thought process and all that stuff. So layer 1 is the choir. The choir sings what's written in the notebook. As the owner of the choir, you get to decide, is the choir singing in a dry space, or are they singing in a really reverberant space? Or is it binaural sound? So meaning like you hear some parts in your left ear and some parts in your right. And so like we've done a lot of interplay in terms of like guiding the sound left or right to make it this like 3D experience. And so, you know, as the layer of the choir, you get to decide how you get to hear the simulation. Layer 2. Oh, and layer 1 is tethered to the background of the notebook and the text here, and also the colors on the bottom, and the radio dials essentially. Layer 2 is Betty's voice. So with the owner of Betty's voice essentially gets to control the narrative. So like story 1 is her hearing the transmission. Story 2 is like being disbelieved for 50 years. About like everything that was going on, and you know, like about her document. And then story 3 is like her describing her surroundings in the moment. And so like the owner of layer 2 gets to choose what part of the story they want to hear, and also it's tethered to the woman that's drawn here, which are based off of Betty Clank's notebook doodles as she was doodling when she was writing. Layer 3 is Betty's choir, and it's represented by this plane. Betty's choir are the individual music notes that are sort of like put in, and they sound like the gentle whirring of an airplane or a propeller. You, as the owner of Betty's choir, you get to choose how the piece overall comes across. Is it warm? Is it ethereal? Or is it something that's nightmarish and really, really distressing? And then layer 4 is Betty's radio, which are these textured and colored pieces of the radio frame. And those, the owner of layer 4 gets to choose which jazz standards come at which time throughout the piece. So, as you hear the simulation, as you're turning the imaginary tuning knob. And so that's like the essential breakdown of how this piece works. Brian, anything that you want to add on the art side?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, you know, you explained it very well, but in terms of like the text on the page, I went through her notebook and I found lines that I found to be the most emotionally impactful, and I kind of grouped them together and added them there. You can see stuff like "I need air," or "send me help," or stuff like that. And you know, those are the kind of things that when you read it, it like breaks your heart to think about. And so I tried to include those there, and then you know, you can see how the women's voices are telling the story of Amelia and what her journey might have been or where she ended up. And that story is entwining her plane and her journey. And it's kind of all tying into that idea of storytelling. You can see with the radio, the dial moves. That was kind of to give an impression that, you know, we're still searching in that sense. And so, you know, at a certain point, Betty stopped hearing the distress calls. And I imagine she was probably fiddling with the radio, trying to find the transmission. So that plays into that aspect. And then the actual frame itself is kind of based on an, you know, old Art Deco radio styles of the time. You can see the knobs are, you know, little plain propeller knobs and you know, built in these kind of Art Deco grills with verdigris in there, and kind of built into a frame so you feel like you're looking at a radio screen, but also it's an album art.
Yeah,
Wow.
I really particularly like this because Bryan has been able to synthesize a very big concept into something that's really, really simple in the artistic representation of it, that doesn't sacrifice the quality or the master of the piece, or like the telling of the piece. Amazing.
Wow, this is amazing. I am you know, I'm like listening and just thinking, this is truly beautiful what you created.
Thank you.
It's really unique as well. And like the drawings, you know, the kind of the artistic part, as you said, Sam, it's kind of so simple, yet, you know, kind of like gets the you know, exactly the story across without, you know, kind of disturbing in any way. It's you know, it's really unique. And yeah, it's great, guys. Like, well done.
Sam, do you want to talk about the physical?
Yeah. So I've just described to you the 4 layers, but I said that there were 5 parts. We are selling the master, and the person who buys the master will get actually a physical radio that will have, you know, they'll be able to see these changes occur whenever layer changes happen. They'll be able to see it in real time. So in essence, what this piece will become is we're finding the original, the original vintage radio, shortwave radio that Betty Clank actually heard Amelia's voice on, and we're like refurbishing it in such a way that there will be an LCD screen that displays the artwork, and then speakers that will play the latest iteration of the music through it. And so with all of that being said, all of a sudden, you know, the master, this piece, in addition to gaining the NFT, the owner will actually get like a physical installation that's like fit for museums and private collections and galleries, and so on and so forth, to be able to display. And that's actually sort of like our ultimate goal here is, we believe that this music is really, really powerful, and it's something that's so unique and so different, not just for like classical music or contemporary music or, you know, anything like that. I think in general, like this is something that's so unique and so different, and we definitely think that it is worthy of you know, applying to several different awards and entities and stuff. And so we hope that the story will live on, and Betty's, you know, the whole story of Betty's Notebook will continue through things like, you know, like physical installations in galleries and other things that we sort of apply for as we go through this. But also, it's like it's a beautiful thing. One of the things about this piece that is so clear, and one of the reasons why we're, you know, sort of putting it onto the blockchain, is because, like, first of all, it's the programmable part of it, right? Like no one has yet been able to like sort of come up with this concept. And async is definitely, like, the team is so accommodating, and they're so willing to think outside the box, and that's like really refreshing and really amazing to sort of like talk about and work with. But also because you know, people who either buy layers or buy a master or other aspects that we can talk about a little bit later, they're actually like investing into the piece, and by investing into the piece, like there's a very clear trajectory here that people can kind of go on. Like, you know, if this piece, I think I'm pretty positive that, you know, we've already gotten coverage from several major outlets like NPR and the Dallas Morning News and several other coming publications in the next couple of months. But also, like, there's just a very clear trajectory for this. Like, if it lands in a museum, if it keeps getting performed, if other versions of the piece come out, like, that's very clear upside that you know, people can see as they consider, you know, sort of like investing in this project, you know, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of the master. So the 4 layers will come as just NFTs. The master will come with a physical radio that is refurbished to show the changes and reflect the changes in real time as they happen.
Amazing. And obviously, this is the first, programmable music NFT piece ever being created, right?
Yes.
So I'm guessing, there's kind of like, more to come, or, there's a whole kind of, future, and you're kind of like opening the way for many more projects like this to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, from Verdigris Ensemble's standpoint, like this is our entry point, and we're really thankful to have had this entry point. We're already talking with like other artists, other musicians about collaborating in the space and really paving the way. I think one of the things that we as an organization feel really strongly about that's worth mentioning is, if you look at the history of if you look at the history of classical music organizations and you look at the history of specifically choral music, you never see. It's really hard. Like it's really hard to make a profit, especially in the United States. Like many orchestras, many choirs, many classical institutions, dance companies, performing arts companies, theater companies, and so on and so forth, are relegated to being nonprofits. And nonprofits are not a bad thing in the United States. There's definitely a place for it, and I think it's really valuable. What we are seeing, however, is that the how do I say this? The model is not as effective as it was. Some of the older donors that would give hundreds of thousands of dollars, like specifically in Dallas, Texas, you have lots of donors. Like Ross Perot, who ran for president of the United States, and several decades ago, was a huge donor up until he passed away, and still continues to be to a certain extent. But many of these donors that give hundreds of thousands of dollars to the arts are passing away, unfortunately, and it's leaving this void because the younger generation, millennials and Gen Zers, don't value the arts as much in the same way that sort of like the older generation has in the past. They value a completely different experience set rather than like status and all this different stuff. They value like experiences and they value other things. And so like nonprofits at this point are like panicking because the funds that they used to be able to generate very easily are now dying. And so what blockchain does is it opens the opportunity to be able to sustainably continue to grow and also to actually make money off of and profit off of recordings and artistic work. Just to give you an example and to let you in the door, I mean, anyone can go on guidestar.org and look at Verdigris Ensemble's 990s and see like sort of like the different how much revenue we've had, how much we spend. We always end up at coming up to zero. And this is like what blockchain does for the first time is it allows like arts organizations like Verdigris to be able to have to like not necessarily a stable source of income, but an income that is true. Generally speaking, our performances never make money. And if you ask any performer, generally speaking, unless they're very, very big, they don't make their bread and butter off of music. And that's like almost counterintuitive. And so this allows an entirely new way of creating content and getting compensated for it accordingly, especially in classical music and choral music. I think if we are able to sell this piece, we hope that it will pave the way for other classical music organizations and other musicians to take the leap of faith to come into the blockchain space and continue and start creating works from there.
For sure. And obviously, from as well from a collector, like from a collector point of view, you also have, maybe you actually open up people who wouldn't necessarily be kind of close to this sort of music, or wouldn't necessarily know about this kind of whole space and whole ecosystem. So it's an amazing opportunity, and it definitely wouldn't happen without NFTs, without the blockchain, without a platform like async that kind of allows this to happen. And I guess, from an artistic point of view, Bryan, like it's also, I mean, maybe like something, completely new to work on, and like, really, really exciting as well, right? Like, what is your
Yeah.
perspective on this?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in the same way that NFTs have opened up, new career paths for artists, this is a career path for musicians, and a new source of revenue, and a whole new way to create. And that's, when, I've been toying with async for like half a year now, and I've always enjoyed the idea of the programmable art. I enjoy parts of the NFT space that can only be done with this technology, whether it's generative art or programmable art. That kind of stuff really excites me, and I love like diving into these niche corners because it's just, it's something I've never had the ability to do before, and that's just, it inspires me and excites me. And the music of this is so deeply complicated that it was exciting to try and think of art in a complicated way as well. And so that part, as a creative medium, it's completely open-ended, and that part just, this project was like, I think Sam would say it didn't take me long to say yes. I think it was pretty quick. I was like, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. And whilst you're on it, I think, I'd love to get your kind of take on programmable art as well. I mean, since we're here and since we're talking about it, I know it kind of like, doesn't go exactly into Betty's notebook, but it's part of, what async does as well. And you obviously said like it's built, the blockchain exists, and these sort of platforms, are built for, the medium, right?
Yeah. No, I think, what async does to a large degree, well, it's extremely open-ended. You can look at like what Matt Kane did with his Bitcoin piece that's, tied to Bitcoin volatility data. You can look at, Christy Glass's piece where she just created this beautiful scene that's completely changeable. It creates a fun puzzle for artists. One, you have to create a lot of variations, and you have to make sure they all look good together. And then you have to hope that whoever owns it can have a collaborative solution that helps sell your vision. And so you can, you can look at some of these examples here. It's fun to create a system in which you give the owners a sense of control versus, a lot of NFTs, they have the ability to resell it or display it in ways. But with async, you're giving the owners the ability to collaborate with each other and feel like they're a part of the piece, and, can take the work and then continue to change it and make it whatever they want. And so it really empowers the owner in a different way than normal NFTs.
For sure. And I'd love to take actually both of you, like your take on both, the future of programmable art, bar, programmable music as well, now that it's, it's happening, and this will be the first project. Like, what is both your take on, what the future holds for both of these? Like, obviously, we all know NFTs are booming, but I guess there's a part of it that is programmable art, programmable music that is bound to, in my opinion, grow even more. What do you guys think?
Oh, you muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Here's my take on it. I think what async art is doing is really compelling, and it's really compelling in the sense that we're not just uploading artworks onto the blockchain. It's not just like putting an MP4 out there or a JPEG or a PNG image and just like being like, this is my artwork. What we are trying to do is we are trying to create an entirely new way of creating, interpreting, understanding, and conceptualizing what art can be. And that is really, really exciting. that is the exciting part about all this, because it's one aspect of this is uploading your art. Another aspect is thinking through how you can get how the art can change over time. People always, when I talk with them about async art and when I've reached out to big artists, they've always said, oh yeah, like this is the kind of art that I would see on like Harry Potter or something. Like it's something very magical, something very different. And it is that, like, we're not just creating a platform. We're creating an art movement, in a sense. It's an art movement that emphasizes customizable aspects of different pieces of art. And, like we can dive into that, and I can show a few examples about things that I think some of the artworks on async art that are really, really powerful and that have showcased the technology really well. But yeah, I think what people and it's also like a very exciting time, Nicole, because like when people discover, when they understand what async art is, because they come to me and they're like, oh, but I have to know coding. No. Oh, but like, I have to know such and such. No, you don't. Like, when they come out and I see their eyes light up as I tell them the possibilities of what they can do, it like changes their world. And so like as more people begin, and I've spent many clubhouses like talking with people too, and it's like it's amazing to see, because people are like, oh my God, like how did I not know about this before? Like, oh my God, like this is so amazing. Like I need to get on an ASAP. Like I think like we're already seeing an influx of like 300 to 400 artist applications a day. And I would even say that even still, async art and async music is largely undiscovered in the space. And I think that's just like, it's such an exciting time, because once people understand exactly what async art can do, it's going to blow their mind, and it's going to blow like their ideas out of the water, and it's just going to be amazing and powerful. So that's my take on it. I'm very bullish on async art. I'm also like in it, and I've seen it with varying degree as well.
Yeah, I think if I had to make a futuristic prediction of programmable art, I would say the storytelling aspect, whether it's a choose your own adventure of a short film where each scene is owned by different owners that can change the way the story plays out, or a graphic novel where each page is owned by different creators, and depending on the day you read the graphic novel, it tells a different story. I think there's bigger storytelling things in the future. This is just the beginning, and we're starting to wrap our minds around it, but really, the possibilities of storytelling are very exciting.
Definitely. And can you share when, or like, I know Brian kind of shared it a little bit on his Twitter, but when will Betty's Notebook be out, or time frames? When is it? When can somebody collect it?
So we will have the official release is going to happen sometime late next month. We'll have an exact date in the coming weeks, but we are starting to already, like this week, you should see a blog post and a couple of different like featured pages on the async art website about Betty's Notebook and so on. So there will be lots of information leading up to it. We're still very much like just in the beginning of this process. And actually, like I have to remind myself and Bryan about this all the time. Like we're all like, oh, like, like we're failing at this. And then we're like, oh, but the piece hasn't even launched yet.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, I think, so to answer your question, late next month is when the release will happen, and there are several other artists that are going to be on wave one of async music, and that will get announced in the next couple of weeks. I think those artists are really, really powerful, and many of them the larger crypto community will recognize, and we're very excited about that. And yeah, but we're going to be having information and interviews and all sorts of stuff leading up to it as well. So there should be this should be like the first wave of many as we get closer to the launch at the end of next month.
And Brian, do you think you'll do more programmable music projects in the future?
Oh, I hope so. This project is so unique, but I see a lot of potential for the platform for a bunch of different genres and how musicians can take advantage of it, and also how, you know, the art can work in different ways. I mean, if you think about, you know, I love to collect vinyl records because the album art is really big, and this is like taking that to a whole nother degree. And so, you know, this is like the dream come true for a vinyl fan. It's like you're owning all the editions, all the special editions of the vinyl cover.
Yeah, definitely.
Just to add on to that, there will be more information coming out about a way for collectors that don't want to spend, you know, thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, or is not in their price range. There will be other ways to collect Betty's Notebook, in more attainable ways. That we'll have more information coming out on that in the next couple of weeks as well. So it should be it should be accessible. We believe that Betty's Notebook should be accessible to everybody, and there will be many options for high level and other level collectors to be able to have a piece of what this work is.
And what about Verdigris Ensemble? Are they excited?
They're very excited. So I will say this. Many of you have to understand the context. The context is like many of our singers are sourced directly from Dallas. They're the best of the best that you know, some of the greatest singers in the country that we have in the ensemble. And much of what they do is a lot of practicing and a lot of singing and a lot of specialized technique. And some of them actually teach also, like in public school and other things. And so like, blockchain to them is a very foreign concept. And so like when I originally came to them, they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I'll do this project, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And over time, as we've sort of like shown them the programmability of this and the customizability, they're beginning to be like, oh, like this like makes sense, and it's kind of very interesting. And it'll be very interesting when you know, I ask them, you know, do they want to get their payment in crypto or in fiat, what their answers will be. But in general, they've really latched onto the piece. They really believe in the piece. When they heard it on Friday, both the Verdigris Ensemble board of directors and the singers were like, oh my God, like I never expected anything like this. You know, like, because when you're doing your part, you only hear your part, but within the context of all the other layers, it's like this entirely new experience that has never been done before. So yeah, they're super excited. They're like, they don't know what to think about blockchain, you know, because there's so many different articles, you know. Some are effusive about blockchain technology, and then others are like pretty negative about blockchain technology. So I think they're like sort of like, I don't know what to think about blockchain and NFTs. I don't know, but you know, the project is very cool, and I think they're beginning to like really get excited about it. So we'll see. I think they'll be very excited about it once we launch and they get to hear everything and see the response.
Yeah, getting to do that listening party was just so wonderful to see their reactions to the piece. For the, you know, it was emotional and it was exciting, and you know, you got to watch their like eyes light up. It was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so cool. I'm looking forward to seeing it all, you know, play out and being live. And also, Bryan, like, you're a little plug for you, because you're the man of the day, you know, Sunday, yesterday, your your big moment on TV. How was that?
I know. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, it was a group effort. You know, the SNL team is huge, and we all contributed, but it was really cool to be able to contribute some of my own work into it and also create some fake NFTs.
Amazing. Love that. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. It was great to have you here. Thanks for spending the Sunday with me. It's super excited about programmable music. So let's see. I'm very, very looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. This was great.
See you soon. Bye-bye.